Hello, my name is Christopher Renstrom, and I'm your weekly horoscope columnist here on Astrology Hub. And today, I wanted to talk to you about the Venus-Jupiter retrograde opposition, followed by the Mars-Pluto opposition, both taking place on November 3rd. But before I do, did you know that you could get my weekly horoscope column by sign sent to you to your own email box every Sunday? You can do this by going to astrologyhub.com/horoscope. Go to astrologyhub.com/horoscope and sign up for getting weekly horoscopes from me to your email box every Sunday. Let's start with the Venus retrograde Jupiter opposition that will be taking place on November 3rd. Venus will be in the zodiac sign of Sagittarius, and Jupiter, as we all know, is currently retrograde in the zodiac sign of Gemini. Now, what makes this opposition so interesting, so fascinating, really, is that it will be taking place with Venus at 20 degrees Sagittarius and Jupiter retrograde at 20 degrees Gemini. Now, why is this important? What's important is that one of the presidential candidates, Donald Trump, was born with his sun at 22 degrees Gemini, conjunct his north node at 20 Gemini. When we remember that Jupiter is retrograde at 20 Gemini, forming an opposition to Venus at 20 degrees Sagittarius, you can see quite easily how those energies tie in, how they click into place. This is what's called a conjunction in astrology. And when you have this kind of clicking into place that's going on with the planetary energy, where the natal chart is connecting to the transiting planet in the sky at that time, this creates a very powerful bond. This creates a very powerful connection. This creates a very powerful energy. Now, Donald Trump, as I said, was born with his sun at 22 degrees Gemini and his north node at 20 degrees Gemini. As a quick reference here, whenever you have the sun conjunct the nodes, and in this particular case, it happens to be the north node, you know that the person was born in the time of an eclipse. It might be on the actual day of the eclipse, or it might have been sometime between the solar or the lunar eclipses. In Donald Trump's case, with his sun at 22 Gemini, conjunct the north node at 20 Gemini, opposite the moon at 21 degrees Sagittarius, and his south node at 20 degrees Sagittarius, this tells us that he was born on the day of a lunar eclipse, which means that any sort of eclipses have a very powerful impact on his chart. What happens when you're born under a lunar eclipse, especially born under the zodiac signs of Gemini and Sagittarius? Well, pretty much two things. First of all, there's going to be boom and bust cycles financially in Donald Trump's life, periods of time where he's going through a great surplus of money in his life, and periods of time when he's not. And then what you also will have, because he's born during a lunar eclipse, an automatic sort of popularity with the populace. People really gravitate towards him. They really understand him. They really relate to him. And that's because people with very strong lunar energy have a tendency to draw crowds of people to them. This isn't normally what we think of with fame. With fame, we kind of think of someone as being more solar than lunar, more of the people. But actually, people who have very strong lunar energy in their charts, these are the people who have an ability to speak to what would be called the common man. And this is amplified during a lunar eclipse. Solar eclipses dealt with people of great prominence and note and power. And lunar eclipses dealt with people who were of the people, who could connect with the people. And this is one of the talents that Donald Trump happens to have. So with this opposition that's taking place between Venus in Sagittarius and Jupiter in Gemini, right across the axis of his eclipse, this is going to be an extremely powerful time for him. And many astrologers have gone ahead and said, well, he's an easy win because of this alignment of planets. Jupiter will be in Gemini. Jupiter is a planet that's associated with good fortune, higher purpose, with fame, with winning. Okay, and so if Jupiter is passing through your zodiac sign, it's said to benefit you. The planet of good fortune and higher purpose is working to protect your interests and to benefit you in every which way it can. And for a long time, that sort of prediction held with the candidates who were originally running for office. This changed, however, dramatically when Kamala Harris entered the presidential race. Now, one might say, well, how does this connect with Kamala Harris? She's born under the zodiac sign of Libra. That's not the zodiac sign of Gemini, although Libra and Gemini are both air signs. So why would any of this benefit her? What's fascinating is the rising sign. But before I get to that, let me make a very quick note. The three most important things to read in an astrological chart are going to be the sun sign, the moon sign, and the rising sign. They're really of equal importance. And a lot of times people can feel more like their sun sign, but other times people can feel like the moon sign describes them. And then there are other times in which people are like, I absolutely identify with my rising sign, and I have no feeling of rapport whatsoever with my sun or even my moon sign. So these are basically called the big three identifiers in an astrological chart. Kamala Harris, as I said, is born under the zodiac sign of Libra, but her rising sign is in the zodiac sign of Gemini. What makes this even more interesting is that Kamala Harris is 24 degrees Gemini. As you may recall, this opposition between Venus and Sagittarius and Jupiter retrograde in Gemini is taking place at 20 degrees Sagittarius and 20 degrees Gemini. Kamala Harris, with her rising sign at 24 degrees Gemini, hooks. It hooks into the transiting Jupiter retrograde at 20 degrees Gemini. It creates as much a circuit of energy as it does as Jupiter would with Donald Trump. In other words, Jupiter is benefiting Kamala Harris just as much as it's going to benefit Donald Trump. But what's even more fascinating is Kamala Harris's ascendant at 24 degrees Gemini conjoins Donald Trump's sun at 22 degrees Gemini. All right, so there's a sun ascendant conjunction that's going on between the two charts. What this does essentially is join the two charts, the two natal horoscopes at the hip. Okay, they're absolutely joined together. Now, what makes this even more interesting, what makes this even more intriguing, is that Kamala Harris's North Node is conjunct her ascendant. Remember, her ascendant is 24 degrees Gemini. Her North Node, which is what astrologers regard as a very powerful karmic point in the astrological chart, her North Node is conjunct the ascendant at 24 degrees Gemini, which means her North Node is conjunct Donald Trump's sun at 22 Gemini, but her North Node is also conjunct Donald Trump's North Node at 20 degrees Gemini. So in other words, there's a lot of nodal energies that are bound to one another. And of course, subsequently, her South Node is going to be conjunct Donald Trump's South Node and his moon. And she's also going to be connected, horoscopically speaking, to his lunar eclipse energy. So this fuses these charts together. It, as I said, it joins them at the hip. And in many ways, because their nodes are conjunct astrologically, and what are the chances of that? They're astronomical. Okay, but in any way, because their nodes are conjunct astrologically, this creates a very powerful and almost inevitable feeling of a karmic bond between the two astrological charts. And again, this is being triggered by the Venus-Jupiter opposition, which is taking place just 2 days before the election. So when the pollsters say, well, this election is just too close to call, they're right. That absolutely is too close to call. Because these two charts are, in a way, conjoined twins, astrologically speaking, both astrologically and karmically. And the transiting energy of the Venus forming an opposition to Jupiter is bringing them into even more of a tighter grip. So, who will succeed? Who will win the election? Well, there's not going to be a clear winner, or at least at first, because the energies are so entangled. It's like trying to separate conjoined twins. It would be a very delicate operation to try to distinguish which one is which, or which one would be the victor in this type of situation. And indeed, whoever does win, clearly, because the race is so tight, is going to have half the country against them. So either of them, whoever wins, is going to have quite a bit of an uphill climb trying to govern as president over a nation that is as divided as this one is about this particular election. What's also playing into this opposite energy, this oppositional energy, and the example that I like to share when I describe planetary oppositions is, ironically, the US Congress, all right? What you have in an opposition is that you have two polar opposites. You have two entrenched parties who are in opposite camps, and they are not going to cross the aisle to the other side. There is an absolute difference of opinion and really no interest in mending it, really no interest in building bridges or reaching out. This is why, in my opinion, as an astrologer, oppositions are the most brittle aspects in astrology, brittle and inflexible to the point of being the ones that are most easily broken. So an opposition can also indicate a split. You know, it's kind of like a bookshelf or a shelf that's borne more weight than it could possibly have, and then it cracks. It falls underneath it. The opposition energy between planets is so tight, it's so tense that you could just, do this and it would split and it would fall apart. So this is probably going to be connected to some sort of split or some sort of break in which there aren't really any satisfactory answers. There aren't any satisfactory resolutions. What's also playing into this is the final Mars-Pluto opposition in our lifetimes. Now, the reason why I say final and in our lifetimes, let me condition that very quickly, because Mars will oppose Pluto again. But when Mars opposes Pluto again, it will not oppose Pluto in the zodiac sign of Capricorn. And that's what I mean by this will be the last Mars-Pluto opposition in our lifetime, or really what I should say is this will be the last Mars in Cancer opposite Pluto in Capricorn opposition in our lifetimes, because Pluto will not return to Capricorn for at least another 240 years. And as you can imagine, this is as significant and as powerful as it sounds. Now, it's not going to be connected just to the date, November 3rd is not going to be a day that lives in infamy or anything along those lines, because this last opposition is the final opposition that's been going on between Mars and Pluto since 2009. All right. So Pluto's been in Capricorn since 2009. This is the last opposition that they're forming in 2024. So what we've seen is an accumulation of opposition energies between Mars and Pluto. This energy has built over a period of time. What does this mean? What's been building over a period of time? I think we can all agree that there is a lot of anger and that there is a lot of fear that's permeating our society. And no matter, it seems, what we do to try to alleviate the anger, to try to reassure the fear, it just keeps growing. It just keeps snowballing. It just keeps getting larger, to the point where some of us may even feel like we're helpless to manage this, that this is a runaway snowball, that it's an energy that will just not simmer down. It cannot be calmed. It cannot be assured. It cannot be placated. It cannot be stopped. What's happening when you have a Mars and Pluto opposition is that you've got the two rulers of the zodiac sign of Scorpio in opposition to one another. And so they can have a tendency to bring out a lot of that subterranean energy, which isn't necessarily associated to Scorpio. It's really more associated to Pluto. Mars was named after the Roman god of war. And so this is why we've been experiencing such escalating tempers and words and anger. All right. Pluto was named after the Roman god of the dead, the Roman god of the underworld. And so where Mars can be very furious and angry in the way that it fights, all right, Pluto is more like a volcano. It's dormant for long periods of time, but when it decides to erupt, or when it decides to send molten lava up into the air, it's irrepressible. There's no way of stopping that. So with this build that we've been experiencing, with these multiple oppositions between Mars and Pluto, which really culminate on November 3rd, this is why we feel like there is so much anger. There's so much anger that just seems so unmanaged that's going on, and that there is so much doom. There is so much pessimism, and that is embraced or embodied, symbolized by the planet Pluto. But there's another theme that's going on here when we bring in the zodiac sign of Cancer and we bring in the zodiac sign of Capricorn. Both Cancer and Capricorn are parental signs. All right, they're parental signs of the zodiac. Cancer is famously associated with being the loving and giving mother, the nurturing mother, because of Cancer's association with the summer here in the Northern Hemisphere, the season of abundance. All the zodiac signs that appear in Western astrology derive their character from the seasons as experienced in the Northern Hemisphere, by simple virtue of the fact that astrology originates in the Mideast. And so it's those seasons that inform the character, the temperament of the signs. So Cancer has always been associated with the mother, and then Capricorn has always been associated with the stern, remote, disciplinarian father. All right. Now, what's funny when we think of these two presidential candidates is that Kamala Harris's nickname is Mamala. All right. That's the nickname that her stepchildren gave her. And it's obviously this term of affection, this term of endearment, but it sort of showed up as like, Mamala Kamala, that there's a mothering energy to Kamala Harris. And Donald Trump recently has been portrayed, I think it was Tucker Carlson describing him as a disciplinarian father, coming home from work and really sort of bringing his wild household into line, that he's going to be this disciplinarian father who's going to control all the chaos. And so you sort of see these ideas sort of showing up in these zodiac signs. But this is the funny thing about an opposition, all right? An opposition, I've described it before as two planets that are as far away as they can get from one another on a circle. You can also think of an opposition as if you've ever gone bowling and you throw the bowling ball and the pins are knocked down, you end up with the two pins that are opposite one another at complete different ends. And then when you're bowling, it's like, what do? Do you try to get one pin, try to knock the other one off, or what? You have to choose one or the other. And what happens in an opposition like this is that no sooner do you choose one than you wish you had chosen the other. And no sooner do you then go and choose the other than you wish that you had gone and chosen the other one. All right. So there's this kind of standing contradiction that goes between the two. But what also happens is that they can sort of change places with one another. All right. One idea I have to describe that is when you look at your reflection in a mirror, you can see yourself in the mirror, but you can't touch yourself because it's behind glass or it's being reflected by glass, and everything is opposite from the way that you actually appear. But what can happen in an opposition is that the other starts playing out different sides of its opposite. Let me explain this. Kamala Harris, for instance, may have the nickname, she has the nickname Mamala, it's an endearment, good mother. But at the same time, Kamala Harris is known as a district attorney, getting very tough on crime. She can be very disciplinarian, and she has a very disciplinarian approach to international relations going into this presidency. She has a very tough approach, something that you might expect from a district attorney who's now going to be president. She's going to prosecute the case of America in the world and sort of make the world behave. And so there's that part of her that was very much on show during her convention. And then what's so funny with Donald Trump is that he can sound very severe and austere and disciplinarian and loud and a bit intimidating, but then he can get very sentimental and very nostalgic in the most Cancerian of ways. I mean, he can hug flags like he was hugging a school teacher, or he plays YMCA for some reason at his conventions and likes to dance and is clearly reliving his disco days or something along those lines. Or if he meets someone that he thinks is mean-spirited, he can suddenly be like, you're a very nasty woman. You're a very, very nasty woman, and this comes out. And so it's kind of funny the way that the Cancerian elements could sort of pop up in him alongside the Capricornian, but the same thing goes for Kamala Harris. And this is what can happen in an opposition. The two planets can sort of, planets in opposition can sort of mirror one another and even take on some of the aspects of the opposite planet with no awareness of it at all.
Hey there, astrology lover. If you're interested in getting a weekly personalized read on your sun sign and you love Christopher, you won't want to miss his written weekly horoscopes from Astrology Hub. Every week, you can get a horoscope from Christopher delivered straight to your inbox for free. Just go to www.astrologyhub.com/horoscope to start getting yours this week. And now, back to the episode.
But let me get to what's going on with this opposition that's going on between the Mars and the Pluto. Mars in Cancer is said to be in fall in the zodiac sign of Cancer. In other words, Mars has the toughest time in the zodiac sign of Cancer. Many astrologers believe that this is because Cancer makes Mars weak. That Mars needs to be in a more soldierly type of sign, like an Aries or a Scorpio or even a Capricorn, something in which you're aggressive and you go after what you want and you're disciplined in a sort of militant approach, and you're going to take no prisoners. You're going to wage the campaign of war, and you're going to show no mercy, and you're going to show no compassion. And so a lot of astrologers will say that Mars in Cancer doesn't really get that militant. It's too soft. It's too easy. It's too mothering. It's too sentimental, too gushy, too caring. And clearly, these astrologers may not have been too familiar with The Sopranos, okay, which is one of my favorite examples of Mars in Cancer. Okay, this is someone who puts family first, puts clan first, and works for the mob. His family's in the mob. This is his world. This is his culture. And if he needs to take out someone who's crossed the line or owes money or has done something wrong to a member of his extended family, he will without question. And so there can be that flavor to a Mars in Cancer. A Mars in Cancer can bring out the clannish aspects of Cancer. In other words, my family comes first. My people come first. My culture comes first, or my tribe comes first. And this can be very powerful, very, very strong with a Mars in Cancer. So what we can see come out with this kind of negative expression of a Mars in Cancer is a nativism. You know, and we hear it in recent slogans that have been thrown around. America's for Americans, you know. And so it's for us and it's not for them. And so there can be this you don't belong here quality that comes out with Mars in Cancer. I'm going to put the needs of my family first, my people first, my culture first, my land first. Okay. And this is more important than you. And you suddenly becomes othered, I guess, is how we say it, otherized, or you suddenly becomes othered. And so other then becomes the enemy. You know, it's the people who aren't part of my clan. It's the people who aren't part of my family. It's the people who aren't part of my culture or my religious belief. You're an outsider. You're an other. You're a foreigner. You don't belong here. You don't know these traditions and these rules. You don't practice them, and if anything, you're going to corrupt them or ruin them. So this can be really sort of the negative aspect of the Mars in Cancer. This tribalism and this excising of anything that doesn't fit and that doesn't belong. So what's the negative side of a Pluto in Capricorn? I think pretty much the negative side of a Pluto in Capricorn can be this kind of exaggerated, stern father figure, which is an absolute authority. You know, this is the absolute father. This is the absolute authority figure. I rule what goes on in this company. I rule what goes on in this household. I rule what goes on in this land, and I'm going to exercise absolute authority. And I'm doing it for your own good, because you're, you know, an acting out rebellious kid, or you disagree, or you don't go along with the flow. And I'm going to set down the parameters. I'm going to say that this is it. And people are going to see me as this father figure, because I'm disciplinarian and I'm making you fulfill your obligations and your responsibilities. What also comes out with the Pluto in Capricorn is the scarcity of Capricorn. Capricorn is a winter sign. As I said, the temperaments of the signs are very much entwined to the way that we experience the seasons here in the Northern Hemisphere, because this is where Western astrology originates. So there is a scarcity to Capricorn. There's a coldness to Capricorn. And so what can happen is that there can be a worldview that the world is a place of scarcity, and that it's going to be overrun by scavengers if you don't protect your interests, if you don't defend what's yours. With Capricorn, there can sometimes be a very fortress attitude, that you drain the moat and lift the drawbridge and shut out the enemy or shut out anything that doesn't belong. And what you can also have with a Pluto in Capricorn is this kind of inevitable pessimism. You know, people don't change. The world doesn't get better. Capricorn is Saturn rules. Saturn in Greek and Roman mythology ruled over the golden age when everything was pure and beautiful and good, when castles didn't have towers and moats because they didn't need defending. There were no swords because no one went to war. There were no judges that you pleaded your case in front of because there was no crime. The land was full of milk and honey. The land was full of good and wonderful things. And life was paradisical, like paradise, all right? Until Saturn was overthrown by Jupiter, and then that's when all the trouble began. So where Cancer can have this nostalgia for earlier time in my life when things were simple and you knew what was what, and you could have parents that you relied on, who would shelter and provide you and show you the best way to live. And Capricorn is longing for the antique world, the world of yesteryear, the world that goes way past into the golden age, when things were simpler, life was wonderful, and people lived in harmony with one another before all these things like, I don't know, options and alternatives and people mucking around with the ways that things were done. Before all of that started, and ruined everything. So with Saturn, there's always this kind of longing for that golden age past. Like, let's get back to the way that things used to be. This was a good and this was a beautiful thing. And because that can't happen, because we aren't time travelers outside of our memory or our nostalgia or our watery Cancerian feelings, we can feel that the world, in a Plutonian Capricorn view, that the world is hopelessly broken, that it's just plodding forward into an even more incoherent and chaotic future, and that we need to set up a fortress mentality. We need to almost guard against the future. We need to, if we can, stop time before things become worse than they already are. And these are the attributes that can be brought out with a Pluto in Capricorn. And as I said, a sort of inherent, almost even inevitable pessimism that people don't change. Life doesn't get better. History just repeats itself over and over and over again. And how can I stop it? Some of these qualities I've described, you might be noticing in the general atmosphere these days, this anger, this pessimism, this fear, this need to protect what's mine. People are going to take it. These are the things that are very much heightened right now. I want to get back to that world of mom and dad. I want to get back to that world where people lived peaceably alongside one another. And they did it because there was one rule. They did it because there was one law. Well, as I said, this is the last opposition that's taking place between Mars and Pluto, with Pluto and Capricorn. And so this is the last time this not only culminates, okay, it brings things to an end, but it breaks it. It splits it. It almost splits it in time. You can almost imagine a sort of BCE/AD thing going on here, before Pluto left Capricorn and after Pluto left Capricorn. And indeed, a lot of people are very excited about what's going to come next. But things don't work like that in history. Things don't work like that in the story of our civilization. We can have a break and we can know that we've crossed the line, and we can know that we can't go home again, that we can't go to the past again, that for better or for worse, we move forward. That could either be towards an idealized future or a fortress future, but it's forward. And there can be this feeling even after this election of like, well, maybe it should have been the other one. There's not going to be a lot of faith in whoever emerges as a winner. And that's an important thing to keep in mind, because I think this is what the final break with Pluto and Capricorn is talking about. We have essentially outgrown our parents, right? Maybe you've had different times in your life where you've checked in with your parents and you've outgrown them. Maybe as a teenage kid, you outgrew your parents because they're so behind the times and they're not hip like my friends are. Or maybe you're a young adult and you're sort of setting things up and your parents try to give you advice. And there's this feeling of like, well, that's the way it worked for you when the economy was in a better place. But for me, where the economy is much more challenging and circumstances are more severe, things are harder. So, I don't know if dad's advice applies or mom's advice applies. And then you may get into midlife or maybe even past midlife, and your parent isn't as parental as they were before. They're not that big a figure. They're not that looming a figure. They're not that dictatorial figure. Maybe if they withheld approval, you've gotten tired of them withholding approval and you called them on that trump card a long time ago, and it just doesn't matter. But we still, in each of us, long for our parents, whether it's a parent's approval that we never got, whether it's a parent's love that we can never get too much of, whether it's our parents' company or their humor, whether it's our parent to have the answer for when things go wrong, to be there, to show up, to be someone that we can confide in and talk to, maybe even argue with the security that even if we argue and fight, we'll come back together again. And over a period of time, the parent isn't as parental as they were before. They're not as vital. They're not as strong. They're not as together, because they've gotten older. Or maybe we've outgrown the patterns that we had with them. And that can be a bit of a bittersweet realization, this idea of outgrowing parents. We may still fight with them and want them to be that mom and dad that they should have been when we were kids. But that's not the way the story turned out. But we're not ready to accept that. And we're still trying to make them be that mom or dad that they should have been when we were kids. So these are all the very, as you can imagine, the complicated feelings that are going on. We want people to take on parental positions, to provide, to look after, to protect, to have answers. And the world doesn't work that way. Astrology doesn't work that way. I mean, in astrology, what we're taught is that there's no predestined destiny. Things aren't going to be clicking into place and going off like clockwork, all right? Astrology isn't Cartesian in its mechanics of the way that the universe works. Astrology is always connected to the transit of the planets, the cycle of the planets, their dips and their rises, their returns and their distancing, those times of life when they're in your corner and those times of life when they're as far away from your corner as they can possibly be. Astrology teaches us that life is cyclical and that there's a consistency in its inconsistency, and that you have to deal with different planetary energies coming in at different times. But another beautiful thing that astrology teaches us in a chart is how to see the world from somebody else's perspective. The simple fact that a Gemini isn't going to see the world the same way as a Libra will. That a Sagittarius isn't going to see the world the same way that a Scorpio will. And you don't have a hissy fit and disagree about that. You have a wonder or curiosity, or you have a frustration and an annoyance, but somehow something leads you to some kind of interest in the way that another person sees the world. And astrology can describe that, not only to ourselves, with our Congress of planets that we're born into and with our natal horoscopes, but astrology can provide us views of another person, not through something doctrinal, not through something that's been ensconced or, stamped, this is the way people should be, but through the living, breathing life of the cosmos themselves and the uniqueness of the architecture of each person's chart. So we're at a point where Pluto's no longer in Capricorn. It's going to be moving to Aquarius. We're at a point where this anger, fear, headbutting or distancing or opposition or entrenchment in opposite camps, meanwhile, filling our lives, where the anger and the fear is no longer sustainable. People can still be angry and people can still be afraid and people can still retreat to their fortresses. But the alignment of the stars has changed, and this will no longer be sustainable. This will no longer be the climate, for lack of a better word, that people will be living in or under. Now, things don't change overnight. We're dealing with the modern planets and they take a long time to go through an astrological sign. That's why we have history. We can check in and see what came before and what were the challenges and what were the truths and insights that people experienced a century ago or 10 centuries ago. We still are linked to those people through our shared humanity, through what's been passed down. So we're reaching this point where we've outgrown the parents. That may be the leaders, that may be the institutions, that may be the dogmas or the doctrines, the things that once offered security and answers are not offering those things now. They're not so relevant. They don't necessarily apply. We might feel the familiar comforts of like, let's have a more disciplined approach, or let's, ostracize people who aren't like us or whatever. But that's not going to work on a planet which has become much smaller and becomes smaller by every decade, all right? There aren't faraway places anymore. This planet is more like a lifeboat than it is a world. But even in a lifeboat, you can make a world. And I think that that's the challenge that we're facing right now. We are the adults now. And that's the message of Aquarius. And that's the message that Pluto, as it enters Aquarius, will be sending. It's really the culture. It's really the climate, And that idea is, that Aquarian idea is that a society is only as good as the people in it. And that's such a phrase. I mean, think about that. Society is only as good as the people in it. One might think, oh, a society is only as excellent. Society is only as productive. A society is only as coherent or strong or unified as the people in it. But I don't think that that's the way that good is being used. Good is being used as good, as in goodwill, all right? As in welcoming, as in protecting. Society becomes our parents after we leave the households of our parents. It's society that takes on that role. It's society where we work out, our differences and our similarities with our neighbors, our coworkers, our bosses, someone we just meet, for a bus ride and have a conversation. All right. But we live within a globe, and we live within an influence. And as Pluto moves into Aquarius, its society is only as good as the people in it. So this isn't about turning to parents anymore. It's really being the adult in the room. We each have to be the adult in the room that we call society. We are the caretakers of our society. We are the people who are in charge of our society. There may be people who become leaders and top of the whatever, and they, have bullhorns and things like that. But they're there for a period of time. Like each of us is here for a period of time. And that's where we are all rendered equal in the eyes of God. That's where we are all rendered equal in the eyes of the universe. Now, this election won't bring about a conclusive result. There's no winning and there's no losing. One side will get their way, and in time, the other side will react and they will get their way. Things are too split. There are no bridges that have been built. People are too entrenched in their opposite corners, at least in the political dialogue in this country. I don't think the same goes for the dialogue of community, the dialogue of people getting along with people. But when it comes to politics, it looks like it's all very shrill and people are in entrenched opposite camps. So this election won't have the promised result that we want it to have. I don't think anyone's really expecting it to. And as I said, it's impossible to achieve that under such powerful planetary oppositions. However, the modern planets, Pluto, Uranus, and Neptune, over the next 2 to 3 years are moving into sextiles. And these sextiles will mend the oppositions. They will set up different roads. They will set up different bridges. They will set up different conversations. And so our transition from where we are on November 3rd to where we will be in 2 to 3 years, this is what the sextiles among the modern planets will all be about. But the important message, this message of society is only as good as the people in it, the important message is that the planets are making us see that each of us has a part to play in the society that we live in, and that our strengths lie in the rich embroidery of our diversity rather than in the monochrome threads of our homogeny.